The November chill in Chicago bites deep, but I barely felt it. Adrenaline, a cocktail of homecoming excitement and pure, unfiltered longing, was pumping through my veins, creating an invisible shield against the icy wind whipping off Lake Michigan. I just wrapped a 6-week trial in California, a brutal legal battle that had squeezed every last drop of energy from me, but the victory was sweet. My reward, an early flight home to surprise my mom for Thanksgiving. I hadn't told her. I wanted to see the look on her face, that mixture of shock and unadulterated joy, when her only son, the one who'd been away for far too long, just appeared on her doorstep. My mother Sarah was my entire world. Ever since my dad died from a sudden heart attack 10 years ago, it had been the two of us against everything. I'd watched her struggle working 2 jobs so I could get through law school, her smile never faltering even when her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. She was the living, breathing definition of sacrifice and unconditional love. So when she met Richard 3 years ago, I was thrilled for her. He seemed like a good man, a widowed financial consultant with a charming smile and an easygoing manner. He made my mom laugh again, a real genuine laugh that reached her eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. They married in a small backyard ceremony, and for the first time in a long time, our house didn't feel quite so empty. With Richard, of course, came his family. His mother Eleanor, a formidable matriarch with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a collection of brooches that looked more expensive than my car. His sister Brenda and her husband Mark, who spoke exclusively in terms of country clubs and their vacations in the south of France. They were different from us. We were blue-collar stock people who believed in hard work and simple kindness. They, on the other hand, seemed to believe in bloodlines and bank balances. But my mom, bless her accommodating heart, tried her best. She learned their recipes, listened to their stories, and folded herself into a world that was entirely foreign to her. And I thought she was succeeding. At least that's what she told me on the phone. As the taxi turned onto our familiar street, I smiled. The houses were decorated with lights and autumnal wreaths. The air smelled of pumpkin pie and burning leaves. This was home. I paid the driver, pulled my suitcase from the trunk, and took a deep, cleansing breath of the frigid air. I could see our house at the end of the block warm and inviting, a golden glow spilling from the windows. I could hear the faint sound of laughter carrying on the wind, the low, happy hum of a family gathered. My heart beat a little faster. I'd pictured this moment 100 times. I'd ring the bell, my mom would answer her, jaw would drop in shock, and then she'd throw her arms around me, happy tears streaming down her cheeks. I started up the walkway, dry leaves crunching under my boots. The laughter grew louder, clearer now. I could distinguish Richard's booming baritone, Brenda's high-pitched giggle. I grinned, feeling a warm surge of belonging. They were in there, all of them celebrating together. My mom's new family. My new family. I decided to circle around to the back, planning to slip in through the kitchen door for maximum surprise. The backyard was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the lively hum from the front of the house. The light from the kitchen window cast a long, pale rectangle across the frost-covered lawn. And that's when I saw her. My mom. She was sitting alone on the old porch, swinging the one my dad had built for her years ago. A single, thin shawl was wrapped around her shoulders, fluttering in the cold breeze. In front of her, on a small end table, was a plate of food. But it wasn't a warm ceramic plate from the feast inside. It was a flimsy, disposable paper plate. On it sat a single, dry-looking slice of turkey, a small scoop of lukewarm mashed potatoes, and a few pale boiled green beans. She was eating by herself in the dark and the cold. She was using a plastic fork, slowly, methodically lifting the food to her mouth, her eyes fixed on some distant point in the darkness. She shivered, not a little tremor, but a deep, full-body shudder that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with a cold that seemed to emanate from her very soul. A chill shot down my own spine, one that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the cold of disbelief of a dawning horrific understanding. Inside, just a few feet away, separated by a pane of glass, I could see Richard raising a wine glass in a toast, his face flushed and jovial. Eleanor was showing off a new necklace. Brenda and Mark were laughing at something on their phones. They were in a world of warmth and light and abundance. And my mother, the woman married to their son, the mistress of this very house, was on the outside looking in, treated like a stranger, like an outcast at her own feast. The handle of my suitcase slipped from my numb fingers, and it hit the frozen ground with a dull thud. The sound seemed to break the spell. My mother turned, and when her eyes met mine, they widened in shock. But it wasn't the happy shock I had fantasized about. It was shock mingled with deep, gut-wrenching shame and a raw, palpable fear. She scrambled to her feet, nearly knocking over the paper plate. "Alex," she whispered, her voice, a ragged, broken thing. "What? What are you doing here?" She tried to hide the paper plate behind her back, as if it were the shameful evidence of a crime. But I had seen it. I had seen the loneliness in her eyes, the tremor in her hands, and the cold, hard truth of her perfect new family. A rage unlike anything I had ever felt in my life ignited in my chest, hot and volcanic. It burned away every rational thought, every legal argument, leaving behind a single primal purpose: justice for my mother. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, then through the window at the party inside, and then back at her. And in that one heart-stopping moment, a decision was made. This was not going to stand. Tonight, this Thanksgiving was not going to be a celebration. It was going to be a reckoning. And I was going to be the judge, jury, and executioner. I'm so glad you're here to listen to my story. If you're watching this, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it's traveled. The war was just beginning. The back porch door opened with a faint protesting squeak, but in the taut silence that stretched between my mother and me, it sounded like a thunderclap. I mounted the wooden steps, each footfall feeling unnaturally heavy, weighted down by the gravity of my unspoken fury. My mom was still standing there, frozen the paper plate, now crumpled in her trembling hand, cold gravy dripping onto the weathered planks of the porch. Her eyes were pleading with me, a silent, desperate appeal to ignore what I'd seen, to pretend everything was fine, to not make a scene. For years, that had been her survival mechanism, to make herself small, to suffer in silence for the sake of keeping the peace. But her peace had been bought at the cost of her dignity, and I wasn't going to let her pay that price for one more second. "Mom," I said, my voice hoarse, barely recognizable as my own. "What is going on?" She shook her head, the tears finally spilling over, glistening under the dim porch light. "It's nothing, Alex. I just needed some fresh air." It was getting a little stuffy inside. Fresh air in the biting cold of a Chicago November, with a pathetic Thanksgiving meal on a paper plate. The lie was so thin, so fragile, it was almost an insult. It showed me how practiced she had become at making excuses for them, how conditioned she was to protect her own abusers. The heat of my anger shifted, crystallizing into something cold and hard. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. This was systemic cruelty. I gently took the crumpled plate from her hand and set it on the table. "We're going inside, Mom," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. I shrugged off my coat, the expensive cashmere I'd bought myself after my first big case, and wrapped it around her shivering shoulders. She sagged against me, so small and fragile, and I felt a wave of protectiveness so fierce it nearly choked me. I had failed her. While I was out building my career, chasing success, I had let these vultures pick away at the soul of the most important person in my life. I opened the kitchen door and let her in. The wave of warmth and the rich smell of roasted food washed over us, a cruel counterpoint to the chill she'd just endured. The room fell silent instantly. The laughter died. Forks froze midair. Every head turned towards us, and I could read the annoyance, the sheer irritation on their faces. My arrival, and more importantly, my mother's arrival inside, was an unwelcome interruption to their perfect party. Richard was the first to speak, attempting to mask his surprise with a wide, false smile. "Alex, my boy, what a surprise! Why didn't you tell us you were coming? He stood up and moved toward me, his arms spread for an embrace. I stood my ground, my body rigid, my gaze flat and unyielding. His arms faltered, then dropped awkwardly to his sides. I wanted it to be a surprise, I said, my voice level. And it looks like I succeeded. I'm pretty surprised myself. Eleanor Richards' mother set her wine glass down with a delicate click. Sarah, dear, she cooed, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. What are you doing? You know you shouldn't be out in the cold without a proper coat. You'll catch your death. It was a masterful piece of manipulation. In one sentence, she'd recast my mother as a reckless child and their cruelty as concerned care. Brenda Richards' sister chimed in, her voice syrupy. Yes, Sarah. We were getting worried about you. You just disappeared. The lies flowed so easily from their mouths, so practiced. They were a choir of deceit, and they had been singing this song for a very long time. But tonight their audience had changed. I looked Richard dead in the eye. She didn't just disappear, I said, clipping off each word. She was eating her dinner, on the back porch, alone, with a paper plate, while all of you were in here, feasting. The silence descended again, heavier this time. Their masks were beginning to crack. A flicker of panic crossed Richard's eyes before he smothered it. Oh, that, he said with a strained chuckle. That was just a little mix-up, Alex. Your mom was feeling a bit overwhelmed, wanted some quiet time. We just thought we'd bring a plate out to her so she didn't miss out on dinner. Quiet time, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You call leaving a 65-year-old woman to sit in near-freezing temperatures giving her quiet time? With a meal you wouldn't feed to your dog, I gestured towards the lavish table at the golden brown turkey and the steaming side dishes, and then I held up the soggy paper plate I still clutched in my hand. The contrast was stark, damning. Does this look like the meal you're eating, Richard? Richard's face flushed a deep, angry red. Now listen here, son. You will not take that tone with me. I am your mother's husband. You may be her husband, I snarled, taking a step forward. But you haven't been acting like one. A husband doesn't let his wife be treated like a servant in her own home. My mother tugged on my sleeve. Alex, please, she whispered, her eyes swimming with tears. Don't make a scene. It's too late for that, Mom, I replied, my eyes never leaving Richard's. This has been a scene for a long time. I was just too blind to see it. Eleanor rose to her feet, her facade of sweetness gone, replaced by a cold, regal hauteur. You are insulting guests in your own home, young man, she said. Your mother is just being overly emotional. She always island. We've learned to manage her little moods. Her little moods, they dared to call my mother's pain and humiliation moods, that was when I knew. There was no misunderstanding here. This was deliberate. This was malicious. They weren't just indifferent. They were enjoying it. They got a sick pleasure out of diminishing her, out of making her feel small and worthless, because it somehow elevated their own status. They didn't see her as family. They saw her as an accessory they could put away when she didn't match their decor. I looked around the room at their smug faces, at the opulence my mother's own house and savings had likely contributed to, and a horrifying realization began to dawn on me. They weren't just emotionally abusing her. There had to be more. A plan. Something was in motion. And I had just walked right into the middle of it. The kitchen standoff had reached a stalemate. The Whitlocks, cornered by the raw, undeniable truth, had shifted from gaslighting to overt defensiveness. Eleanor, adopting the posture of a besieged queen, folded her arms across her chest. I think it's best if you leave, Alex, she announced, her voice glacial. You're clearly upsetting your mother and ruining what was meant to be a lovely evening. Ruining their evening. That was all that registered. Not the fact that my mother had been debased, not the fact that she had been treated worse than a stranger. Just the inconvenience of my presence, the interruption of their carefully staged play. I looked at my mom. She was staring at the floor, my oversized coat swallowing her small frame. She looked like a chastised child, not a grown woman in her own home. The sight of it hardened my resolve. I wasn't going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice dangerously calm. In fact, I think we should all sit down and have a little chat. There are a lot of things I'm suddenly very curious about. I pulled out a chair from the kitchen table and sat motioning for my mom to take the one beside me. She hesitated, but a look from me conveyed the message, trust me. She sank into the chair, her trembling hands clasped in her lap. Richard, Brenda, and Mark exchanged uneasy glances. Their script had been shredded. The lead actor was refusing to follow his lines. Curious about what Alex, Richard asked, attempting to regain some semblance of control. Surely we can discuss whatever's bothering you after dinner. We have guests. Oh, I think this is the perfect time, I replied, leaning back. Let's start with those little moods Eleanor just mentioned. Mom, can you tell me about them? My mom flinched. Alex, don't know, Mom. I want to know. Have you ever told me you felt unwelcome here? I asked gently. She shook her head, not meeting my eyes. Have you ever told me they made you feel small or invisible? Another shake. Have you ever told me, I pressed my voice, dropping, that you were forced to eat alone on the back porch while they feasted inside? Her silence was its own answer. Tears began to trace paths down her cheeks again. I turned my gaze back to the Whitlocks. You see, she didn't tell me, because she was protecting you. She has been enduring your abuse in silence probably for years to preserve this pathetic illusion of a happy family. A family she clearly isn't a part of. Brenda scoffed a nasty grating sound. Abuse. Oh, please. You're being dramatic. Your mother is just overly sensitive. She misinterprets things. Really, I shot back. Then tell me what I'm misinterpreting right now. Explain to me logically, Brenda, why my mother, a woman who has worked hard her entire life, is eating leftover scraps from a paper plate in the freezing cold, while you and your family enjoy a gourmet banquet. She opened her mouth, then closed. There was no logical explanation, and she knew it. Mark, her husband, who had been mostly silent all night, decided it was his turn. Look, Alex, he said, his tone patronizing. There are dynamics in every family. You probably don't understand. You've been away. My temper flared. I may have been away, but I'm not an idiot. I know what love and respect look like. And this, I said, gesturing around the room, is not it. I turned back to my mom. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let them treat you this way? She finally looked at me, and the raw pain in her eyes almost brought me to my knees. Because I didn't want to be alone anymore, Alex, she sobbed. After your father died, the house was so quiet. Richard came along and he brought laughter back. I just wanted to make it work. I thought if I tried hard enough, if I was good enough, that they would accept me. Her confession shattered my heart into a million pieces. She had endured this humiliation not out of weakness, but out of a deep, profound fear of loneliness. They had preyed on her vulnerability, turning her need for love and companionship into a weapon against her. They made her believe she had to earn her place, and the price was her self-worth. Richard moved toward my mom, placing a clumsy hand on her shoulder. Sarah, honey, it's not like that. We love you. My mother recoiled from his touch as if she'd been burned. For the first time, a spark of defiance lit her eyes. Love me, she asked, her voice trembling but stronger now. Do you leave someone you love to shiver in the cold, Richard? Do you mock their pain behind their back? Do you stand by while your family treats them like dirt? Richard was speechless. Her words, catalyzed by my presence, were finally breaking free. Eleanor, sensing they were losing control, intervened. That's enough. Sarah, you're making a fool of yourself. It's obvious your son has been putting these ideas in your head. No, I said, standing up. I haven't put any ideas in her head. I've simply opened her eyes to the truth she's been trying to ignore. The truth that you have taken advantage of her kindness. You've taken advantage of her generosity. You've lived in her house, eaten her food, and probably spent her money, all while treating her like a second-class citizen. That last part, spent her money, seemed to hit a nerve. A subtle shift occurred in the room. Richard and Eleanor exchanged a look so fleeting it was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. It was a look of shared conspiracy, of a shared secret. It wasn't just about social cruelty. It wasn't just them being snobs. There was something more concrete, more tangible at play. I started connecting the dots. My mom's recent phone calls where she'd seemed stressed when I asked about finances. Her offhand comment a few months ago about Richard helping her get her papers in order. The Whitlocks' possessiveness, their insistence that they, not my mom, were in control. A cold sense of dread began to creep into my anger. They weren't just destroying her spirit. I had a terrible feeling they were trying to destroy her financially. And this house, the house my parents had worked their whole lives for, was at the center of their plan. The confrontation in the kitchen had reached an impasse. The Whitlocks had formed a defensive wall, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing, while my mother, emboldened by my presence, had finally found her voice. But it was that fleeting glance between Richard and Eleanor that haunted me. It was a flash of cold calculation in a sea of hot emotion, and it told me the story ran much deeper. I knew screaming wasn't going to get me anywhere. If there was a financial plot, they would never admit it. I needed to think like a lawyer, not a furious son. "All right," I said, my voice shifting, becoming calmer, more measured. The energy in the room shifted with it. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I overreacted." My mother looked at me, confusion etched on her face. The Whitlocks looked visibly relieved. They thought they had won, that I was backing down. That's exactly what I wanted them to think. "It's been a long flight," I continued, affecting a weary tone. "And walking into this, maybe I misinterpreted the situation. Mom, why don't you go upstairs and rest for a bit? I'll bring you a cup of tea." My mom hesitated, but my eyes sent her a clear message: play along. She nodded and quietly excused herself. The moment she was gone, Richard clapped me on the back with false heartiness. "See, Alex, no harm done. We're all just a family trying to get along." "You're right," I said, forcing a smile I hoped looked genuine. "I'm sorry for ruining dinner." I made an excuse about needing to use the restroom and headed upstairs. But instead of the bathroom, I made a beeline for the small study at the end of the hall where I knew my mother kept all her important papers. The room was dark and quiet. The smell of old books and ink filled the air. I flicked on the small desk, its soft glow illuminating the oak desk my father used to work at. I began to search my hands, moving quickly but carefully through the neatly labeled file folders, bills, taxes, insurance. Everything seemed to be in order. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe my paranoia had gotten the better of me, but then I saw it. Tucked beneath a stack of utility bills was a dark blue leather-bound portfolio I'd never seen before. It was unlabeled. My heart began to pound. I opened it. Inside was a thick sheaf of legal documents. The words at the top of the first page made my blood run cold: irrevocable living trust agreement. I'm a lawyer. I knew exactly what this was. It's a sophisticated legal instrument often used in estate planning to transfer assets, but it can also be horrifically abused. I scanned the pages, the dense legalese swimming before my eyes: grantor, trustee, beneficiary. And then I saw the names. My mother, Sarah Miller, was listed as the grantor, the one creating the trust. Richard Whitlock was listed as the sole trustee, the one controlling the trust. And the beneficiaries, the ones who would inherit everything upon my mother's death: Eleanor Whitlock, Brenda Whitlock, and Mark Peterson. My name was nowhere to be found. They were writing me out completely. But that wasn't the worst of it. According to the terms of this trust, my mother would be signing over ownership of her house, her entire retirement savings, and the investment portfolio my father had painstakingly built to the trust. Once signed, it could not be changed. She would lose control of everything she owned. She would effectively become a renter in her own home, living off a small stipend at Richard's discretion, while he and his family had total control of her assets. It was a financial death sentence cleverly disguised as a legitimate estate plan. They didn't just want her quiet, they wanted her destitute. They wanted to strip her of everything so they could live their lavish lives on her back. And the most chilling part, on the final page there was a line for my mother's signature, and next to it a handwritten note in Richard's script: "Sarah, my love, just sign here." The lawyer said, "This is the best way to protect your assets for our future. Love R." He had framed it as an act of love, a way to protect her when it was in fact an act of grand larceny. I felt physically sick. The audacity, the sheer cruelty of it was staggering. They had weaponized her love and trust to try and trick her into signing away her financial life. I took photos of every single page with my phone, making sure every word, every comma was crystal clear. This was no longer a family dispute. This was fraud, and I had just found the smoking gun. I heard footsteps on the stairs. I quickly put the portfolio back where I'd found it, doused the light, and slipped out of the study, my heart hammering against my ribs. Brenda was standing at the top of the hall watching me with suspicion. "Are you lost, Alex?" she asked, her voice laced with her usual condescension. "Just looking for the bathroom," I said breezily, walking past her. "Found it." I went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, trying to quell the inferno raging inside me. When I looked in the mirror, a different man looked back. The naive son was gone. The angry son had been replaced by the cold, calculating resolve of a lawyer. I had the evidence. Now I needed a plan. A plan to not only expose them, but to make sure they could never harm my mother or anyone else ever again. The game had changed, and I was about to rewrite the rules. Returning downstairs, the atmosphere had shifted. The Whitlocks, believing they had successfully weathered the storm, were back to their party. Their laughter sounded forced, but they were trying desperately to restore their illusion of normalcy. Richard had the audacity to put an arm around my shoulders and say, "See, Alex, all's well that ends well. Now sit down and have some turkey." I looked at his smug face, knowing he had a pen in his pocket and a plot in his head to bankrupt my mother, and I felt a level of contempt so profound it almost made me gag, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't let them know that I knew. Their ignorance was my greatest weapon. "You know what, Richard? I think you're right," I said, manufacturing the friendliest smile I could muster. "I think I'll get a plate." I spent the next hour playing the part of the dutiful son. I made small talk about my job, listened to Mark's tedious stories about his golf handicap, and even complimented Eleanor's pumpkin pie. Every word, every smile was a lie, but it was a necessary performance. I needed to gather intelligence. I needed to understand my enemy better. As they talked, I listened. I noted how Brenda kept glancing at her expensive watch, how Eleanor spoke of the house as if it were already hers, how Richard deflected any questions about his own financial situation. They were careless, confident in their own cleverness, and in my perceived gullibility. All the while, my mother remained upstairs. I knew she was hurting, probably blaming herself for causing trouble. I had to act fast, not just for the sake of justice, but to free her from the guilt they had burdened her with. Finally, I made my excuses, claiming exhaustion and the need to get back to my apartment downtown. "But I'll be back in the morning to take Mom out for breakfast," I announced, looking directly at my mother, who had come down the stairs to see me off. Just the two of us. It was a message. A promise. As I walked out the door, I could feel their eyes on my back. I knew they were whispering, probably congratulating each other on handling the Alex problem. Let them. The more they underestimated me, the harder they would fall. The second I was in my car, I was on the phone. My first call wasn't to the police. It was to someone I trusted implicitly, someone with the skills and discretion I desperately needed. His name was Marco, an old friend from law school. While I went into corporate law, Marco took a different path. He became a private investigator, one of the best in the city. "Marco," I said the moment he picked up. "It's Alex. I'm in big trouble, and I need your help." I drove to a 24-hour diner in a gritty neighborhood where we used to cram for the bar exam. 15 minutes later, Marco slid into the booth opposite me. He looked the same, just with a few more lines around his eyes and the weary cynicism that came with his line of work. I showed him the pictures of the legal documents. He let out a low whistle. "Damn, Alex," he said. "Your new step-family doesn't mess around. This is a pro-level scam." "I know," I replied. "And I need you to find out everything about them. Richard especially. His finances, his business dealings, any skeletons in his closet. I want it all. It'll be expensive, Marco warned. Money is no object, I said. I want you to dig deep. I want you to find me something irrefutable. Marco nodded, his eyes glinting with the thrill of the challenge. Consider it done. My second call was to my Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She lived in Arizona, but she and my mom were incredibly close. Carol was a straight shooter, a no-nonsense woman who never minced words. I told her everything from the paper plate on the porch to the irrevocable trust. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard a string of curses. That witch, Carol snarled, and I knew she was referring to Eleanor. I always said there was something off about that family. Too slick, too perfect. I need your help, Aunt Carol, I said. I need you to talk to Mom. She's scared and she feels guilty. She needs to hear from someone else that this isn't her fault. She needs to know she has backup. You don't even have to ask, Alex Carol said, her voice firm. I'm on the first flight to Chicago tomorrow morning. Those vultures won't know what hit them. Finally, I called a colleague at my firm, an expert in trust and estate law named Jessica. I explained the situation hypothetically without using names. Jessica, I asked if someone was being coerced into signing a document like this. What are their options? First, don't sign, she said immediately. Second, gather evidence of coercion or undue influence. Texts, emails, witness testimony. Anything that shows the person wasn't acting of their own free will. Her advice confirmed my own instincts. I needed more than just the document. I needed proof of their intent. I needed to catch them in the act. A plan began to form in my mind. It was audacious and risky, but if it worked, it would not only save my mother, but it would walk the Whitlocks right into a trap from which there was no escape. That night, I barely slept. I sat in my high-rise apartment looking out at the city lights, my mind racing. I was assembling my army, a sharp-eyed investigator, a tough-as-nails aunt, and my own legal knowledge. The Whitlocks thought they were playing checkers with a novice. They had no idea they were about to face a grandmaster. And I wasn't going to stop until I'd said checkmate. The sun rose over the Chicago skyline, painting the sky in shades of bruised gray and soft pink. But I'd been awake and in motion for hours. My plan required precision and perfect timing. The first step was to extract my mother from the toxic influence of the Whitlock house. I arrived at 8 a.m., just as I'd promised. Only my mother and Richard were there. Eleanor and the others had apparently gone to their own homes, likely still basking in the glow of their perceived victory from the night before. My mom looked exhausted, her eyes puffy from crying, but a small flicker of hope ignited in them when she saw me. Richard, on the other hand, looked distinctly annoyed by my presence. "Good morning, Alex," he said, his tone straining for cheerfulness. "Your mother and I were just about to have some coffee." "Great," I said. "But plans have changed. Mom and I are going away for the weekend, starting now." Both my mother and Richard stared at me, stunned. "Away," my mom stammered. "But what about the rest of Thanksgiving weekend?" "Thanksgiving is over, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "It's time you had a real break. I've booked us a suite at a luxury spa in Lake Geneva. Massages, room service, and absolutely no Whitlocks." Richard immediately moved to block it. "Now hold on, Alex. I don't think that's a good idea. Your mother needs to rest here at home." "Oh, I think this is exactly what she needs," I countered, my eyes challenging him. "Unless you have some reason you don't want her leaving the house, maybe some important papers that need signing." I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. I'd hit the mark. He needed her here, where he could apply pressure, where he could wear her down into signing those documents. My taking her away threw a wrench in his timeline. "Don't be ridiculous," he blustered, but the confidence was gone from his voice. "I'm just concerned for her well-being." "Then let me be concerned about it for a while," I said. "Mom, go pack a bag. We're leaving in 10 minutes. While my mom was upstairs, I confronted Richard in the kitchen. "Let me make this perfectly clear," I said, my voice low and cold. From this moment on, all communication with my mother goes through me. You will not call her, you will not see her, and you will most certainly not present her with any documents to sign without my reviewing them first. Do you understand? His face darkened with rage. You have no right, I have every right, I cut him off. I'm her son, and I'm a lawyer. Try me, Richard. I'm begging you to. He backed down, intimidated by the steel in my voice. He was a bully, and like all bullies, he was a coward when faced with real opposition. My mom came down with a small overnight bag, and we left without another word. As we drove away, I saw Richard standing in the window watching us go, his face a mask of thwarted anger. Instead of Lake Geneva, I took my mother to a charming boutique hotel in Lincoln Park where I'd booked a suite under an assumed name. Once we were settled, Aunt Carol called. She had landed at O'Hare. I handed the phone to my mom. "Carol," my mother said, and then the dam broke. She burst into tears, pouring out the whole heartbreaking story of years of subtle abuse and isolation. I let the sisters talk, let my mother unburden herself of the weight she had carried alone for so long. While she was on the phone, I called Marco. "They're going to be scrambling," I told him. "Richard will be calling Eleanor. I want you on them. Tap their phones if you can. I need to know their next move." "Already a step ahead of you," Alex Marco's voice crackled on the line. "I put a tracker on Richard's car this morning, and I'm working on getting a warrant for a wiretap. Give me 24 hours. Aunt Carol arrived at the hotel a few hours later, a whirlwind of righteous indignation and supportive energy. She enveloped my mom in a fierce hug, and for the first time in days I saw my mother truly relax. Having an ally, someone who knew and understood, made all the difference. While Carol stayed with my mom ordering room service and letting her talk, I met with Marco again. He already had intel. "Richard isn't just a financial consultant," Marco said, sliding a file across the diner table to me. "He's drowning in debt. Gambling debts, bad investments. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. He needs your mother's money, Alex. And he needs it fast." The file also revealed that Eleanor was no wealthy dowager. She was living on Social Security and the charity of wealthy friends. The entire Whitlock image of power and affluence was a house of cards. They were desperate con artists, and my mother was their golden ticket. Now their urgency made sense. I needed to force their hand. I needed to set a trap. I went back to the hotel and laid out my plan for my mother and Aunt Carol. "Here's what we're going to do," I said. "Mom, you're going to call Richard. You're going to tell him that I apologized, that you convinced me I was wrong. You're going to tell him you want to come home and sign those papers to prove your loyalty to him." My mother's face went pale. "You want me to go back there, only for a little while, Mom," I assured her. "And you won't be alone. You'll be wearing a wire. Aunt Carol and I will be nearby in a van listening to every word. Marco will be outside. You will be perfectly safe." "But why, Alex?" "Because I need them to admit it, Mom," I said, my voice hardening. "I need them to say it on tape, exactly what they're trying to do. I need a confession. It was a huge risk. It required my mother to face her abusers head on." I looked at her, willing her to agree. After a long, silent moment, she looked at Aunt Carol, then back at me. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she said, her voice still shaky but her eyes resolute. "I'll do it." The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for the rats to walk into it. The following day, the air in the hotel suite was thick with a nervous tension. We spent the morning prepping my mother. Marco had delivered a small, innocuous-looking brooch, but inside its delicate filigree was a powerful microphone and transmitter. He clipped it to my mom's sweater and showed us how it worked. We could hear even the faintest whisper from across the hotel room with perfect clarity. Aunt Carol and I role-played with her, acting as Richard and Eleanor, throwing the questions and manipulative lines at her that we anticipated they would use. "Remember, Mom," I said, taking her hands in mine, "you just need to get them talking about the documents. Ask why my name isn't on it. Ask what happens to your money. The more details, the better." She nodded, her face pale but determined. I had never been prouder of her. She was turning her fear into a weapon. At 3 o'clock, my mom made the call to Richard. Her voice, as we had rehearsed, was small and apologetic. "Richard, it's me," she said. "I'm so sorry about everything." "Alex, he just doesn't understand. I've talked to him. I want to come home. I want to make things right." On our end, we could practically hear the smug relief in Richard's voice. The fish had taken the bait. "Of course, sweetheart," he purred. "Come home. We all miss you." "I'll be there soon," my mom said. "And Richard, I'm ready to sign those papers. I want to show you and your family that I'm all in." "That's wonderful, Sarah. That's the right decision." His voice was dripping with triumph. After he hung up, he wasted no time. Marco, who was monitoring his calls, informed us that Richard immediately called Eleanor and Brenda. "She's on her way back," he told them. "And she's signing. Get ready." An hour later, we were in position. My mother drove home her car, now equipped with a GPS tracker. Aunt Carol, Marco, and I were in an unmarked van parked down the street equipped with headsets and recording gear. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. 1,000 things could go wrong, but I trusted my mom. I trusted my team. We heard the sound of my mom's car pulling into the garage, then the door opening. "Sarah, you're back," Richard's phony, jovial voice came through our headsets. We heard footsteps as she entered the house. "Eleanor, Brenda, you're here too," my mother said, her surprise pitched perfectly. "Of course," dear Eleanor's voice dripped with fake sincerity. "We came to welcome you home. We were so worried." They ushered her into the living room where the ominous blue portfolio was already laid out on the coffee table. "Now," Sarah, Richard began, wasting no time. "About these papers. This is for your own good. To protect you." "I understand," my mother said softly. "But I had one question. Alex mentioned that his name isn't on here. Why is that?" There was a slight pause. "Well," Eleanor interjected smoothly, "Alex has his own successful career. He doesn't need your money. This trust is to ensure that the family who cares for you is taken care of later. It's only fair." "The family who cares for me," my mother repeated. "You mean you?" "Precisely," Brenda said. "We're the ones who are here for you every day. Alex isn't. This was it. The moment we were waiting for. So, what happens to my house and my savings after I sign?" my mother asked, her voice convincingly tremulous. Richard chuckled, a self-satisfied sound I could vividly picture. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about the details, sweetheart. Technically, they'll belong to the trust, which I will manage. I'll make sure you have everything you need. You'll never have to worry about a thing again." And after I'm gone, my mom pushed. "Then, as per the terms, the assets will be distributed to the beneficiaries." "To us," Eleanor stated flatly, her patience wearing thin. "That's how it works, Sarah. Now, are you going to sign or not? But it sounds like I'm giving everything away," my mother said, her voice trailing off into a whisper. "It's the price of security, my love," Richard said. "It's the price of being part of this family." Brenda lost her temper completely. "Oh, for God's sake, Sarah, stop playing the victim. We have put up with your dramatics for years. You owe us this. After everything we've done for you, after Richard rescued you from your lonely life, this is the least you can do. Just sign the damn paper so we can all get on with our lives." In the van, Aunt Carol's jaw dropped. Marco just nodded, a grim smile on his face. We had it. A full, unprompted, undeniable confession. They hadn't just admitted to their plan. They had revealed the true depth of their contempt and malice. They believed my mother owed them her life's savings. "All right," my mother whispered into the wire. "I'll sign." She reached for the pen. But just before the nib touched the paper, I spoke into my own microphone. "Now, Marco." Marco nodded and pressed a button on his phone. Instantly, blue and red lights began to flash at the end of the street, as 2 police cruisers we had prearranged turned into the driveway, their sirens suddenly piercing the quiet afternoon air. At the same moment, Aunt Carol and I exited the van and strode purposefully towards the front door. The first part of the trap had sprung. Now it was time for the grand finale. The wail of the sirens grew louder, a jarring shriek that shattered the suburban tranquility. Inside the house, I could hear the nascent panic through our headsets. "What the hell is that?" Richard yelled. "Why are the police here?" Eleanor rushed to the window. "My God, they're pulling into our driveway." Brenda began to stammer. Maybe it's the neighbors, a burglary. But the conviction was gone from her voice. They knew on some primal level that the party was over. At that exact moment, Aunt Carol and I kicked open the front door. We didn't knock. We didn't ring. We entered like a force of nature, our faces set and implacable. Behind us, 2 uniformed police officers followed, their hands resting on their sidearms, their very presence filling the room with an undeniable authority. The Whitlocks spun around to face us, their expressions. A comical mixture of horror, disbelief, and incandescent rage. My mother, still seated on the sofa, calmly placed the pen down and looked at them, but this time there was no fear in her eyes. Only a profound sadness and a cold, hard resolve. Alex Richard roared. "What have you done, me?" I said, walking calmly into the center of the living room. "I haven't done anything. I've simply arranged for a few unexpected guests to attend this momentous signing." I gestured to the police officers. "Officers, I believe we've just interrupted an attempt at felony elder financial fraud." One of the officers, a burly man with a thick mustache, eyed the documents on the table. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice all business. Eleanor attempted to regain her composure. "Officer," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "this is a private family matter. My daughter-in-law's son is having an emotional outburst. Nothing illegal is happening here." "Is that so?" I said, pulling out my phone. "Then I guess you won't mind if we all listen to a replay of the last few minutes." I connected my phone to a small Bluetooth speaker I'd brought with me and hit play. Their own voices filled the room, amplified and irrefutable. "This trust is to ensure that the family who cares for you is taken care of later." Eleanor's cold voice echoed. "Technically, they'll belong to the trust, which I will manage." Richard's smug pronouncement. And then the crescendo, Brenda's shrill, angry shriek, "You owe us this! Just sign the damn paper, so we can all get on with our lives." The color drained from their faces. They looked like ghosts haunted by their own words. The police officers looked at them, then at me, and understanding dawned in their eyes. "Sounds pretty cut and dry to me," the mustached officer said. "Smells like undue influence and fraud." But I wasn't finished yet. "Oh, it gets so much worse," I said. Marco entered from the kitchen door, having circled around the back. He was holding another file. Richard Whitlock, Marco said, reading from his notes. "Owes over $100,000 to Vegas casinos. Is currently under investigation for investment fraud. Has already drained the retirement accounts of at least 3 other elderly clients." Each accusation was another nail in Richard's coffin. He staggered back as if physically struck. Brenda and Eleanor stared at him, horrified. They might have been cruel snobs, but they had no idea they'd partnered with an actual career criminal. "And that's not all," I said, turning my attention to Eleanor. "This woman, who presents herself as a pillar of the community, has been living off funds she embezzled from a church charity for the past 5 years. Eleanor gasped, her face contorting in a mask of fury and humiliation. But my biggest surprise was reserved for Brenda and Mark. "And you two," I said, looking at them. "That luxury car you drive, it was purchased with money funneled out of Mark's own company. The SEC is going to be very interested to hear about your insider trading, Mark." Mark went white as a sheet. Their entire charade, their whole phony life had come crashing down around them in a matter of minutes. They weren't high society elites looking down on my mother. They were desperate, grifting criminals trying to pull off one last score. And then the front door opened again. This time, it wasn't the police. It was a group I had personally invited. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune who owed me a favor. A well-known blogger who specialized in exposing financial scams. And two board members from the prestigious country club, Brenda and Mark, were always bragging about. They walked in just in time to hear the final accusations, their cameras flashing, their notebooks open. The private humiliation had just become a public spectacle. Eleanor looked like she was about to faint. Brenda burst into hysterical sobs. Richard just stood there, utterly defeated, the trap having snapped shut around him perfectly. The officers moved in. "Richard Whitlock, you're under arrest on suspicion of fraud," one said, snapping handcuffs on his wrists. The others began questioning Mark and Eleanor. I walked over to my mother, who sat quietly amid the chaos, watching it all unfold. I knelt in front of her. "It's over, Mom," I said softly. She looked at me, her eyes clear. "You knew," she whispered. "How did you know all of this?" "I had a little help," I said. "But more importantly, I believed in you. And I refused to let them win." She reached up and touched my cheek. "Your father would be so proud of you, Alex," she said, and those words at that moment meant more to me than any courtroom victory. The Whitlocks had been exposed not in a quiet courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Their pride had become their shame. Their reputation was in ashes. They had lost everything because they had tried to take everything from the one woman they so foolishly underestimated. And they had underestimated her son's love for her. The chaotic symphony of the arrests eventually faded, leaving an unnerving quiet in my mother's living room. The flashing lights of the police cars still swept through the windows, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The reporters had been ushered outside, but they lingered on the front lawn like vultures waiting for the last scraps of the story. The Whitlocks were gone, Richard and Mark in handcuffs, Eleanor and Brenda trailing behind them, their faces, a mask of disbelief and utter humiliation. The house which had been the stage for their cruelty now felt cleansed. My mother, Aunt Carol, and I sat together on the sofa, a comfortable silence settling over us. The weight had been lifted. My mother's years-long silent battle was finally over. But I knew this was just the beginning of another fight, the legal one. In the days that followed, the reality of the situation set in. Richard, Mark, and Eleanor all faced a battery of criminal charges ranging from fraud and embezzlement to grand larceny. The story became a local sensation, splashed across the front pages of the newspapers. "Suburban elite family exposed," as grifters read one headline. "Widow nearly loses all in Stepson's devious plot," screamed another. The pristine reputation they had worked so hard to cultivate was irrevocably destroyed. But it was the civil fallout where I focused my energy. My first move was to file for divorce on my mother's behalf, citing extreme cruelty and fraud. Simultaneously, I filed for a restraining order legally, barring any member of the Whitlock family from contacting my mother or coming within 500 feet of her. With the evidence we had, especially the damning audio recording, the judge granted it immediately. My mother was finally legally safe. Next, I began the arduous process of untangling the financial mess Richard had created. With the help of Jessica, the estate expert from my firm, we discovered that Richard had been quietly siphoning money from my mother's accounts for months. He had forged her signature on checks, moved funds to offshore accounts, and even taken out loans in her name. The extent of his betrayal was breathtaking. We filed a massive civil lawsuit against Richard and the entire Whitlock estate, seeking punitive damages not just for the stolen money but for the years of emotional distress they had inflicted. Their lawyers, realizing they didn't have a legal leg to stand on, quickly offered a settlement. They proposed returning the stolen funds in exchange for us dropping the suit. I refused. "No," I told their lawyer over the phone. "This isn't just about money. This is about accountability. We will see you in court, and we will air every single one of your clients' lies in front of a jury." They panicked. The prospect of a public trial where all their dirty laundry would be aired was the last thing they wanted. They came back with a second, much better offer. Not only did they agree to return every cent Richard had stolen with interest, but they also agreed to sign over the deeds to the two properties. Eleanor owned a condo in Florida and a cabin in Wisconsin to my mother as part of the divorce. Settlement. They were essentially giving her their only remaining assets to avoid the public humiliation of a trial. After discussing it with my mother, we accepted. My mother didn't care about the properties or the money, but she cared about closing this chapter of her life. She wanted to be free. As for the criminal charges, things did not go well for them. Armed with the irrefutable evidence Marco and I had gathered, and my mother's powerful testimony, the prosecutors had an ironclad case. Richard was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to a significant prison term. Mark, for his embezzlement and insider trading, also received jail time. Eleanor, given her age and poor health, avoided prison, but was sentenced to strict probation and ordered to pay full restitution for the money she'd scammed from the church charity. Brenda, while not facing criminal charges, became a social pariah. Her country club revoked her membership. Her wealthy friends shunned her. She lost the one thing she valued above all else, her status. Throughout this entire process, my mother exhibited a strength I had never seen in her. She took the stand in the criminal trial and told her story with dignity and grace. She faced her abusers and did not flinch. She was no longer the frightened woman I had found on the porch. She had reclaimed her voice, and it was powerful. Aunt Carol stayed in Chicago for several weeks, a constant source of strength and support. The sisters reconnected on a deeper level, and I saw my mother laugh freely for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Marco had proven to be worth his weight in gold, and I paid him double his fee. But more than that, we had solidified a lifelong friendship. When the dust finally settled, when the divorce papers were signed, and when the Whitlocks were nothing more than a bad memory, a deep sense of peace descended upon our home. But it was a different kind of peace. It was stronger, more resilient. It was a peace forged in truth and fortified by justice. The legal battle was over, but the real healing was just beginning. A year later, the house that once held so much pain and secrecy was filled with light and laughter. My mother had decided against selling it. "This was your father's and my home, Alex," she'd said. "And now it's mine again. I'm not going to let their memory taint it." Instead, she had reinvented it. The dreary gray walls were painted a warm, sunny yellow. The dark, heavy furniture the Whitlocks had favored was replaced with bright, comfortable pieces. And most importantly, she had converted the study where I'd found those damning documents into an art studio. After years of suppressing her creative spirit, my mother had started painting again. Her canvases filled with vibrant colors and life now adorned the walls. She painted landscapes from her travels, flowers from her garden, and portraits of the people she loved. She joined an art class at the community center and fell in with a lively group of women who dragged her to gallery openings and coffee shops. She was no longer alone. She had found her tribe. Financially, she was more secure than ever. With the returned funds and her 2 new properties, she had more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of her life. But interestingly, she became more generous than ever. She established a small fund at the local senior center to provide free legal aid to elders facing financial scams. She had turned her pain into her purpose. Aunt Carol was a frequent visitor, and their trips were no longer whispered phone calls about worries but loud, adventurous escapades. They took a trip to Italy together, where my mom painted the sunflower fields of Tuscany, and to Arizona, where they hiked in the Grand Canyon. I saw a lightness in my mother, a joy for life that I thought had been permanently extinguished. As for me, I had changed too. The ordeal with the Whitlocks had forced me to reevaluate my own priorities. I realized that my single-minded pursuit of corporate success had made me blind to what was truly important. I cut back my hours at the firm. I started taking on pro bono cases representing people who couldn't afford a lawyer. And most importantly, I made more time for my mom. We had dinner every week. We went to movies. We talked about everything and nothing. Our bond had become deeper and stronger than ever before. One beautiful Sunday afternoon, about a year after that fateful Thanksgiving, we hosted a party in the backyard. Not a major holiday, just a simple gathering. Aunt Carol flew in. Marco and his family were there. My mom's new friends from her art class brought homemade dishes. The house was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of barbecue. My mother, wearing a brilliant blue dress, moved among her guests, her face glowing with a genuine, unforced happiness. She looked 10 years younger. She looked free. I was standing at the grill flipping burgers when my mom came up beside me. She handed me a glass of iced tea. "Thank you, Alex," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine with a depth of love that needed no words. Not just for saving me, but for giving me back to myself. "You saved yourself, Mom," I said. "I just helped open the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it." She smiled, a real, radiant smile. "We did it together," she said. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, watching the people we loved, enjoying a perfect day. There were no more shadows, no more secrets, just the warmth of love and community. The story of the Whitlocks ended as it should have, in a sad, pathetic whimper. Richard and Mark remained in prison. Eleanor lived out her final days in quiet disgrace, shunned by the society she so desperately craved. Brenda, after a messy divorce from Mark, had to sell her house and move into a small apartment, working a job she despised. They had reaped what they had sown. But our story was different. Our story wasn't about revenge, though justice had been served. Our story was about redemption. About finding strength in vulnerability, finding light in the darkness, and realizing that true family isn't about blood, it's about love, respect, and loyalty. It's built not on complex legal documents, but on simple moments like sharing a meal, a laugh, or just sitting together in the backyard on a sunny Sunday afternoon. And as I looked at my mother laughing with her friends, I knew that this was the real victory. Not the win against the Whitlocks, but the victory of love over hate, of truth over deceit, and of a new beginning over a bitter end. And that was a story worth telling.